My friends, after 3 months of grinding battle, Ukraine is doubling down in the Robotyne sector. And yet, they might lose it all. Ukraine is currently pushing in between Robotyne and Verbove towards these fortifications of Russia's first line of defense, in this sector considered to be the weakest of the entire Surovikin line. I find it very sus. It feels as if the Russians are purposely baiting these Ukrainian assault detachments into a bunch of gullies.
It's a trap!
I'll be blunt, at this point I think that the Ukrainian command knows that their offensive has failed. Especially since the Ukrainian offensive in the Robotyne sector seems to have come to a halt. They lost so many Bradleys and Leopards that they already stopped using armored formations, and now they resorted to small-scale local infantry attacks, which resulted in a steep rise in casualties. And now we can add the first destroyed Challenger 2 tank near Robotyne. French newspaper Le Point went to the front and interviewed a Ukrainian soldier that was wounded near Robotyne. He said, "We are pushing forward, but despite our caution, we are recording heavy losses. At this rate, we will need reinforcements quickly."
Sector 4 needs reinforcements. We are being overrun.
Blyat, we are the reinforcements! Meanwhile, one of Ukraine's last reserves, the Elite 46 Air Mobile Brigade, might be experiencing some issues.
Ми виконували бойове завдання під керівництвом командира батальйона майора Ногінова Олександра, який віддавав злочинні накази, посилаючи нас на штурм під вогнем артилерії і мінометів. Нас відправляли просто на м'ясо.
Ми готові хоч зараз в бій, але не під командуванням цього злочинця. Така думка, що він працює на Росію. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
While Ukraine is exhausting its last reserves, Russia has only just begun the transfer of reinforcements from other parts of the front. The Telegraph even wrote, Russia sends its elite troops as Ukrainian counteroffensive gathers pace, like the infamous VDV, the Russian paratrooper regiments. Either the arrival of these elite paratrooper units means they're there to plug the gaps, consolidate already existing positions, and relieve tired frontline units, or they have been deployed there to launch a counterattack, either to retake lost positions like Robotyne or worse. As Ukraine penetrates deeper and deeper, it seems they have forgotten the importance of girth, because it opens them to a flanking maneuver. In this case, the Ukrainians would be trapped, like the Roman legions at the Battle of Cannae. Theoretically, from their bases in Kopani, the Russians could launch an offensive towards Orikhiv, which is the entire logistical base of this Ukrainian offensive. If the Russians are actually planning a counteroffensive, potentially the Ukrainians would have to abandon all their latest gains and pull back to avoid their best units to be encircled. And you can imagine what would be the impact of such a move on our beloved Ukrainskaya Armia. According to the website Medusa, a significant part of the Russian reserves of the southern group have already been sent into battle, and now they are waiting for reinforcements from other directions, namely the 76th Air Assault Division, since on their telegram post of the 31st of August, they said the Crimea front was now history for them. There's also the deployment of the 7th Guard Mountain VDV Division from Kherson, and reportedly there's also the arrival of the 503rd Motorized Rifle Regiment. 2 entire divisions is a considerable force for solely defensive operations. The Ukrainian command knows that the battle to reach the Sea of Azov has been lost. So now their goal is to establish the best positions for a renewed offensive in winter or even in 2024. Oh yeah, in that case, you'll see this face for quite some time. Oh, and don't you dare bring up anything of this, because Ukraine's foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, said that anyone criticizing the slow pace of the counteroffensive should shut up. And if the situation couldn't get worse, the Russians are truly some sadistic maniacs, because they're already building more lines of fortifications. Check out the expansions of these defenses 40 kilometers away from the front? Or what about those north of Polohy? And those are only the ones we can see using satellite imagery. It doesn't take into account all the ones that the Russians have hidden in tree lines, like they have done in the past 3 months. This Polish foreign volunteer revealed to newspaper Wiadomości the Russians have very good engineered troops. The defense system was built by construction companies. It wasn't the peasant who waved the shovel around to build the trench. Companies came, poured concrete, and made fortifications in the style of the Maginot Line. And there are 3 or 4 of these lines. Of course, the Ukrainians are trying to halt this process by launching their own drones at these Russian engineering units. But let's go back to Robotyne for 2 seconds, because this is the centerfold of the current battle. Here's a picture of the village of Robotyne that Ukraine has been fighting for so hard in the past few weeks. In my last video, I said that the fall of the village would happen for sure at some point. And 2 days later, Ukrainians did confirm the capture of the place. However, I'm shocked. The Russians are not giving up. Newspaper Le Point also interviewed a Ukrainian intelligence officer, and to their astonishment, he revealed, for the moment, the enemy does not back down and resist with all his might. The Russian defenders at Robotyne stood their ground so much that the Ukrainians had no other choice but to change their plans and bypass this entire sector. On September 1st, Ukrainian assault squads discovered a network of tunnels east of Robotyne, from where Russian infantry appeared and disappeared during their many counterattacks. A bit like the Japanese defensive positions in Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Hi and welcome to History Legends. Here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukrainian War. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my Ukraine videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped. And welcome to the headquarters. In this video, some Ukrainian troops are seen advancing towards the front. This soldier walks by 2 destroyed Russian T-72s, and we can clearly see the dragon teeth of the Surovikin line in the background, which marks the first line of defense. Thing is, this was geolocated right here, and seemingly this entire sector is secured by Ukraine. Here you can see NATO-trained soldiers of the 47th Mechanized Brigade, clearing out part of a tree line, most likely somewhere south of the village near these Russian entrenchments that you can see on screen. They're carrying multiple machine guns. They're ready for battle, but they suffer casualties from returning fire, and half their squad has to get evacuated due to combat injuries. Meanwhile, this guy's happy that he survived thanks to his bulletproof vest, which is a reminder for you guys to always cover up and bring protection. Now notice how they seem to be using a Wolfhound armored vehicle for their medevac operation. And in the following article, the Wall Street Journal reported, for now the Ukrainians must resupply frontline troops on foot, or at best, using motorcycles, all-terrain buggies or pickup trucks. They have to resupply their troops on foot. Oh my god, how are they supposed to win in these conditions? Right now, the battle has shifted from the village of Robotyne itself towards this fortified bastion 700 meters to the south of the settlement. And if we zoom in, this is what we get. Advanced positions, covered trenches and fighting positions, steel roofs and bunkers at the rear for ammo storage, and of course for accommodation. Ukrainian artillery will have a hard time piercing through all this, no matter how precise the rounds are. And here we can see some more trenches inside that tree line, and that's only the visible part of their fortifications. We can suppose the Russians have even more defensive positions around these woods to cover their right flank. This fortified bastion alone explains why the Ukrainians are having so much trouble breaking out of Robotyne and exploiting their latest victory. The Ukrainians can only storm these bastions with infantry and artillery alone, since armored vehicles get light up the moment they reach the front. There was this outpost located right at the exit of the village and 300 meters ahead of the main fortified bastion. We have a video from the 26th of August, where Ukrainian howitzers of the 47th Mechanized Brigade shelled these same Russian positions I just showed you. They seem to be bombarding them with cluster munition. But most importantly, notice that the surviving Russian troops are fleeing to the rear. For me, these guys are Storm Z troopers, the former inmates that were recruited into the Russian army. They were most likely told, hold the position as long as you can, and then pull back. And that's how they simply retreated to the main line of defense. Despite all the anti-tank fire, the Ukrainians continue their assaults and try to send their tanks to support the advancing infantry. However, continuously attacking the same places come at a cost. If you look at this map, the Ukrainians are stuck in this sort of bulge, or salient. Even worse, if we look at an elevation map, we notice that Ukrainian assault units are pushing into these sort of gullies, which Ukrainians and Russians call balka. The height difference is not drastic, but since we're talking about infantry platoon engagements, that will mean that the Ukrainians will fight an uphill battle, from where they can easily be ambushed. Take a look at this order of battle in and around Robotyne. The Ukrainians have the equivalent of 12 brigades in that sector. As many were defending Bakhmut during the winter, and despite this mass of troops, they're still struggling. As many as 5 armored vehicles were destroyed on the way to the village. Same scenario here, with 4 additional vehicles destroyed or abandoned. This seems even worse, since I think this one is a Stryker APC, which belongs to one of Ukraine's elite brigades sent as reinforcements. The reason why I think that the Ukrainians got trapped near Robotyne is that they can only advance as long as the Russians in front of them are pulling back. Any attempt to create some sort of armored fist or even assault detachment fist to really break through Russian lines will immediately get intercepted by enemy artillery. In order to reinforce the front line and send reinforcements, the Ukraine command has to send troops for kilometers in open terrain, with most of the tree lines destroyed and most of the villages destroyed as well. So there's barely any cover. In these images of nighttime bombardment, the Russians shelled some Ukrainian reserve unit positioned at the rear. Reportedly, that unit lost 50 KIA or wounded in 2 days. As you can imagine, this situation complicates the delivery of supplies and reinforcements to the front. On September 2nd, the 47th Mechanized Brigade lost 1 Bradley and 1 tank. And here's a before-after of some Leopard 2A4 getting slapped on the cheek by a 152mm round. 3 days earlier, on the 31st of August, you can see 2 of the Bradleys that were damaged and then fully destroyed near the village of Robotyne. There have been so many confirmed losses of this vehicle. Team Oryx is retiring, so the number has not been updated in a while. But at this point, the number of M2A2 Bradleys that were lost in combat are around 70. At the same time, we can't only take into account vehicle losses, because the Russians are laying some pretty sadistic ambushes. This IFV drives into the village. We can recognize an M2A2 Bradley with the TOW missile launcher system stacked on its left side. The Bradley drops a first batch of 6 riflemen. You can see the geolocation of this video on the east side of the village of Robotyne. What's cruel is that the Russians didn't immediately fire at them. They stalked them and purposely let the Ukrainians repeat their mistake over and over as they dropped yet another squad right into this trap. This is when this Russian D-20 battery started singing and carried out 4 very precise artillery strikes directly into these buildings. That's at least 1 squad gone. How many more times has this happened over the past few days and weeks? Here's another Russian ambush. We can see a Ukrainian squad walking back and forth between these houses in Robotyne when the Stick 2S7 peon woke up, followed by multiple artillery strikes on the entire sector. Then of course Russian aviation gets jealous and also wants a shot at the bowling alley by dropping FAB-500s on any stationary target. This is why it's very important for Ukrainian soldiers to find a way to protect themselves from artillery fire. This picture shows Ukrainian infantrymen rebuilding some trenches, most likely some second wave territorial defense guys that are revamping some destroyed Russian trenches that were previously captured. And this allows them to at least get some cover when Russian drones are lurking over them. But as always, this goes for both sides. Ukrainian artillery fired some cluster munitions at some 4 Russian trucks coming as reinforcements, roughly a company worth of men, 100 troops, and the ambush caused the carnage. Let's talk quickly about FPV drones. I thought this following footage was really interesting. We got a first FPV targeting this Ukrainian anti-tank unit, followed by a second one. But notice how we have a third drone guiding these 2 FPVs in real time. This means these drone attacks are extremely coordinated. In this one, you can see a French-made Caesar self-propelled howitzer. A first FPV misses the target, but the driver loses control of the vehicle. A second FPV comes in once the Caesar is immobilized, followed by a third one to finish it off. That's how some drones only worth a couple thousands of dollars fully destroyed some military equipment worth $7 million. We could think of these FPV drones as the Stukas during World War II with their sirens, which truly affected the morale of the guys on the ground. Last video I told you that the Russians seem to have so many drones that they even attack infantry with them now. Well, the theory has been confirmed. The website Lost Armor added another 200 confirmed FPV drone strikes in August alone, compared to 123 in July and 92 in June. 40% of all FPV strikes were carried out in August. It will be very interesting to see the numbers of September to see if this trend continues. And in that case, the Ukrainians better ramp up their electronic warfare capabilities. Now we know that Ukraine can't push too deep because eventually they'll hit a wall. They absolutely need to secure their flanks and expand their breachhead in order to continue their offensive. To this effect, Ukrainian forces are trying to gain control of the villages of Verbove east of Robotyne and Kopani on the west side. In my previous video, I expected the Ukrainians to put the B in Borsh towards Kopani and wipe this ridge clean. But it seems these Russian fortifications west and south of Robotyne are holding longer than expected. But like we saw, these are not simple trenches. These are 360 defense networks because they can't break through on the west side. Ukrainians have been putting the focus on the east side. And this is where we saw the latest gains that made the entire Western media go nuts. At the same time, I understand Ukrainians managed to capture 1.6 kilometers in only 3 days. So let's analyze the furthest extent of Ukrainian progression in that sector by looking at all the places where Ukrainian troops have been spotted. In the intro, we saw that on September 1st, Ukrainians were spotted right here. Then, according to this video, the Russians shelled a Ukrainian vanguard that reached the tip of the village of Verbove, right here in the east. The Ukrainians seem to enjoy shoving their tips a bit everywhere, because on the 27th of August, the Russians bombarded the outskirts of the village of Novopokrovka, proving that some Ukrainian forces did make it that far into second base, which is northeast of the front. This other Russian kamikaze drone footage attacked a Ukrainian target geolocated right here. This was on the southern tip. Lastly, you can see a Russian infantry squad retreating along a communication trench and then targeted by Ukrainian artillery, which was geolocated right here on the map. So as a summary, here are the 5 locations where Ukrainians were recently spotted at. So we can clearly see that the Ukrainians are massively pushing east as they're trying to flank these entire Russian fortifications and at the same time clear this entire area north of the main line of defense. I mean, for the Russians, this is perfect. Anything that pushes the Ukrainians away from Tokmak is a win. And every day the Ukrainians spend pushing east, the Russians reinforce their fortifications everywhere along the front line, especially on the important logistical axis. This sector belongs to the 82nd Air Assault Brigade. There's also the 46th Air Mobile Brigade, aka the men that were complaining about being sent into suicide missions, and the 15th Karadag Brigade, all of which are part of this corps sent in as last reserves. After them, there's not much left. For now, some losses have been recorded. According to the latest videos, at least another 3 Stryker APCs one T-72B and a Wolfhound MRAP were damaged and abandoned. Here you can see 3 Ukrainian soldiers of the 15th Brigade Counterattack walk through positions they just captured, where another Stryker fell into a ditch. The 82nd still has to engage its infamous Challenger 2s into battle, which, in my opinion, they will keep once they break through this first line of defense in an attempt to really exploit their breakthrough. At the same time, we have the first confirmed destruction of a Challenger 2 tank, which operated as part of the 82nd Air Assault Brigade. That's 1 out of 14 destroyed. On August 31st, the Ukrainians formed some sort of Kampfgruppe. A recon detachment of the 15th Brigade Counterattack was sent forward with the support of artillery and 2 Su-25 attack aircraft. Then 4 assault detachments, so 4 platoons in total, of the 82nd Air Assault Brigade and the 46th Air Mobile Brigades attacked the strongholds of the Russian armed forces in the Chubenkov-Balka area. So it's very interesting to see how they don't attack as single units, but they mix them all up. The formation of such ad hoc units could either show that Ukrainians can quickly adapt to the fluid situation of the battlefield, but it could also mean that some units have suffered significant casualties and that they have to be regrouped together. On September 1st, they also tried to attack towards Verbove, but they were repulsed by artillery fire. For example, in this video we can see an assault group of the 82nd targeted by Russian AGS-17 automatic grenade launchers. However, there was something that Russian Telegram was worried about: the increase of Ukrainian fighter aircraft in the sky. On September 1st alone, they noted airstrikes from 10 Su-25-27 and MiG-29 aircraft. This could mean that the Ukrainians finally managed to punch a hole through Russian air defense coverage in this very critical sector. Or it could be a sign of some sort of desperate attempt to achieve a breakthrough by risking pilots and aircraft for close air support missions. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my channel, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.